Welcome to the debate. Imagine a predator who doesn't bare their teeth, but, instead cries, sighs, and tells you how much they're hurting right before they consume your sanity.
Size. It is a chilling image, and unfortunately, it is the exact lived reality for countless individuals.
Yeah, it really is. And that image is central to the clinical literature we're examining today on covert narcissism. I mean, we are decoding a psychological profile that completely upends our traditional understanding of abuse. I approach this material as a behavioral profiler, so my focus is squarely on the darker, predatory mechanics of the covert narcissist.
Right.
I'm looking at how they calculatedly mask their grandiosity under a shy, introverted, or even depressed persona, utilizing pity, passive aggression, and subtle manipulation to just gain absolute power over their targets.
And I come at this literature from the trenches of clinical practice as a trauma-informed therapist. My focus is entirely on the victim's perspective. Because analyzing the abuser's tactics is valuable, sure, but we must understand how this insidious behavior completely destroys the victim's reality from the inside out.
Yeah.
We have to look at the invisible red flags, the devastating somatic toll of constantly walking on eggshells, and, most importantly, how victims can protect and reclaim their sanity when their own brain has essentially been turned against them.
So to really understand the mechanics in the literature, we have to recognize that from a profiling standpoint, covert narcissism is a highly organized predatory pathology. I mean, society has this cartoonish view of narcissists, right?
The loud, overt ones, yeah.
Exactly. The loud, chest-thumping braggart. The CEO who demands the corner office. But the covert narcissist is far more dangerous because their shy, sensitive, or misunderstood demeanor is a calculated disguise. By playing the ultimate victim, they extract narcissistic supply, which is, admiration, caretaking, and control, all while evading accountability entirely.
The disguise is exactly what traps highly empathetic people, though. The trap is literally baited with vulnerability.
Exactly. And to understand how they maintain that disguise, you have to understand the psychological mechanism of compartmentalization.
Right.
Imagine the covert narcissist's mind as this massive building filled with empty, locked rooms where they hold the only key. They operate a strict double life. In one room, they project a charming, selfless, maybe even fragile public persona that completely wins over the community or the workplace.
Oh, they're always the saint to everyone else.
Always. But behind a locked door in the private room with their partner, they are a devaluing, controlling predator. They move seamlessly between these rooms, leaving the victim entirely isolated because absolutely no one else sees the monster behind the door.
Deep, frustrated sigh. This is exactly what trips victims up. When we focus purely on the mastermind mechanics of the abuser navigating these rooms, we risk minimizing the profound, insidious damage done to the person locked inside with them.
Well, how so?
Because the real tragedy in the literature isn't just that the narcissist is compartmentalizing, it is what we call epistemic collapse in the victim.
Define that for the listener because epistemic collapse sounds incredibly clinical, but the reality of it is actually terrifying.
Yeah, it really is. So, epistemic refers to knowledge, how we know what is real and what is true. Epistemic collapse means the systematic dismantling of a person's reality. The manipulation is so subtle and so deeply coded as care or vulnerability that it erodes the victim's ability to trust their own brain.
Right.
The victim isn't just being tricked, their nervous system is being hijacked. To survive this relationship, they are forced to construct a false self, like a perfectly patient, ever-accommodating version of themselves, just to manage the narcissist's endless, fragile demands. They literally lose their core identity in the process of keeping the peace.
I agree. The loss of identity is the result, but we cannot truly help a victim rebuild that identity without dissecting the exact mechanics of the trap. We have to look at how they achieve that erasure. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight.
No, definitely not.
It happens through very specific tactical gaslighting.
It happens through 1,000 invisible cuts, yes.
Right, so let's look at the literature's breakdown of gaslighting in these dynamics. Overt narcissists gaslight through sheer dominance. They yell, they intimidate, they tell you directly that you're crazy. Covert narcissists, however,
gaslight through woundedness. They use what I call the sympathetic guys and the joking guys.
The backhanded compliments wrapped in a smile.
Exactly. Picture a dinner party, right? The covert narcissist will deliver a micro insult, like a deeply cutting remark about their partner's intelligence or appearance. But they'll wrap it in a joke for the table. And when the victim naturally reacts with hurt or, tries to defend themselves, the narcissist doesn't get angry.
No, they act completely baffled.
Right. They feign profound concern. They tilt their head, sigh, and say, "Honey, why are you taking everything so seriously? You must be under a lot of stress lately. I'm worried about you." Wait. Look at how they use pity in that moment. It is a highly calculated dog whistle abuse.
Dog whistle meaning only the victim hears the true frequency of the threat.
Precisely. To everyone else at the table, the abuser looks calm, patient, and caring. Meanwhile, the victim, whose nervous system is just spiking because they were just attacked, looks hysterical, defensive, or unstable. The narcissist has successfully isolated them in plain sight.
That dinner party scenario is the perfect pivot to the victim's internal experience. You're describing the mechanism of the abuser, but let's look at the mechanism of the victim's brain in that exact moment.
Okay, let's hear it.
From the victim's perspective, this dog whistle abuse triggers a phenomenon called betrayal blindness, which is a concept pioneered by researchers like Dr. Jennifer Freyd.
How does that blindness actually function in real time? Because, from the outside, people always ask, why don't they just leave? Why don't they see what's happening?
Because you have to understand human evolutionary biology. Human beings are hardwired to maintain attachment to survive. Like a child cannot survive without a caregiver. So if the caregiver is abusive, the child's brain suppresses the abuse to maintain the attachment.
Right, to literally stay alive.
Exactly. And as adults, we map our romantic partners onto that same exact attachment circuitry. When the person who is supposed to be your safe harbor is simultaneously the predator subtly destroying your reality, the brain faces an impossible conflict.
So to recognize the abuse is to recognize a life-threatening betrayal.
Yes, if the harbor is the storm, the brain breaks. So what does the brain do? It unconsciously suppresses the reality of the abuse. It accepts the narcissist's version of events, that it was just a joke at the dinner party, to survive the attachment.
Wow.
This leads to a terrifying reality behind closed doors. I see incredibly intelligent, driven, highly successful individuals. Lawyers, executives, doctors, who end up sitting at their kitchen islands at 2 in the morning, typing 47-page timestamp documents.
Just to verify their own memory against the narcissist's quiet, patient rewrites of history.
Yes. They are sitting there cross-referencing text messages from 6 months ago because their partner looked them in the eye and calmly said, "I never said that, you're imagining things again." They are literally acting as forensic auditors of their own lives because their reality testing has been completely obliterated.
Well, that 47-page document is exactly what I'm talking about. It proves the victim is dealing with a covert pathology that relies entirely on plausible deniability. The covert narcissist survival depends on that ambiguity, and they compound this epistemic collapse through another tactic deeply explored in the source material, which is weaponized incompetence.
Which is often masked as depression or anxiety.
That's exactly how it's masked, because they play the perpetual victim, the person who is just too sensitive or misunderstood by a cruel world. They force their partner into the role of the ultimate fixer.
Right.
Let's look at a household scenario. The holidays are coming up. The covert narcissist will offer to handle the logistics, but they will do it so poorly or wait until the absolute last minute and have an emotional collapse about how overwhelming it is.
And then what happens?
The victim has to swoop in and take over. The victim ends up taking on all the emotional, financial, and logistical labor of the household.
And they do it because it's easier than dealing with the narcissist's sullen withdrawal.
Exactly. But if the victim dares to point this out or ask for genuine partnership, the covert narcissist doesn't yell. They withdraw. They use the silent treatment. They pull away their warmth, acting deeply wounded, wandering around the house like a kicked puppy, forcing the victim to chase them and apologize for asking for help.
And right there, when you say they act wounded, we have to look at what that withdrawal does to the person on the receiving end.
That's not depression. That's weaponized guilt. It is a predatory leash used to regain control. By forcing the victim to constantly manage their fragile emotional state, the narcissist drains the victim's executive function.
Well,
if you are listening to this right now and thinking, my partner does this, but maybe they really are just depressed, you have to look at the tactical deployment of that depression. Does it magically appear right when you need support? An exhausted victim who is constantly managing an adult toddler's emotional crises doesn't have the energy to realize they are being abused.
hold on. You're framing this purely as an energy drain or, as you said, weaponized guilt. But I think that completely minimizes what's happening to the body. You are missing the physiological devastation this causes.
The body?
Yes, the victim isn't just fixing things around the house. They are quite literally walking on eggshells, and the somatic toll of that is catastrophic. This isn't just about feeling tired. We are talking about severe physical manifestations of a chronic trauma bond.
I mean, the literature certainly highlights physical symptoms, but break that down for us. What does that actually look like in the living room? Are they physically freezing?
Yes, absolutely. My clients come in with chronic jaw tension from literally biting their tongue for years. They have severe gastrointestinal distress, autoimmune flare-ups, and a permanent flinch response. This is where Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory is essential to understanding the literature on covert abuse.
Explain the mechanics of that. How does polyvagal theory apply to a person dealing with a passive-aggressive partner?
So in a healthy relationship, the ventral vagal nerve, which is part of our parasympathetic nervous system, signals safety. It allows us to connect, to relax, to digest our food. In a covert narcissistic relationship, you have a horrifying mismatch.
A mismatch between what?
The abuser's face says, "I love you." Their tone might even be soft, but their behavior and their microexpressions say, "You're not safe." This mismatch is neurologically devastating.
Because the brain is receiving contradictory data streams simultaneously.
Exactly. The victim's nervous system realizes it is under threat, but it cannot fight back because the abuser is playing the victim, and it cannot flee because of the attachment bond. So what happens? The nervous system locks into a fawning state, which is the false self we discussed, that people-pleasing trauma response. Or worse, it drops into dorsal vagal collapse.
Which looks like what behaviorally?
It looks like sitting in your car in the driveway for 45 minutes after work because your body physically will not let you turn the doorknob to go inside your own house. It is complete somatic numbness, dissociation, and paralysis. You mentioned the locked hallway metaphor earlier, right?
Yeah.
Imagine being the victim trapped in that hallway, never knowing which version of your partner is going to open the door. Is it the charming public persona or the private predator? That chronic unpredictability breaks the nervous system. You cannot just profile the abuser's tactics. You have to treat the profoundly dysregulated nervous system of the victim.
I completely agree that the physical toll is devastating, and those symptoms, the GI distress, the paralysis in the driveway, are absolutely real. But my point is that you cannot cure a somatic symptom without first addressing the cognitive lie that's causing it.
But
The symptoms you are describing are the physical manifestations of cognitive dissonance. To escape this trap, to truly break free, the victim must intellectually strip the narcissist of their power.
But how do they do that when their prefrontal cortex is basically offline due to trauma?
By achieving a state of forensic detachment, they must recognize the compartmentalization we talked about at the beginning. The victim has to intellectually accept that the public, charming, selfless persona their partner projects to the world is a complete fabrication. It is a ghost. It doesn't exist.
Right.
The private predator who devalues them behind closed doors, that is the reality.
That is a brutal realization for a victim to swallow, though.
It is brutal, but it's the only way out. Once a victim learns to profile their abuser, once they see the micro-insults at the dinner party not as accidental slights from a depressed partner, but as deliberate, calculated control tactics designed to extract narcissistic supply, the illusion shatters.
I see what you're saying, but
The anxiety begins to dissipate. When you realize you aren't crazy, you are just being managed by a con artist. You have to intellectually break the compartments.
I understand the appeal of that approach. I really do. It sounds very clean.
But I have clients who can articulate the exact diagnostic criteria of covert narcissism. They have read all the literature. They know they are being manipulated. They have profiled their partner perfectly.
And
Yet when their partner walks in the room and gives them that specific disappointed sigh, their stomach still drops. Their hands still shake. The body keeps the score. You cannot think your way out of a compromised nervous system. Insight does not equal regulation.
without the intellectual framework, the victim remains trapped in the emotional narrative the narcissist created. If you don't actively name the tactic in real time, if you don't say to yourself, they are diverting, or they are trivializing, or this is sympathetic gaslighting, you remain vulnerable to it.
Sure, naming it helps, but
Naming the behavior neutralizes its power. It forces the victim out of the emotional processing center of the brain, the amygdala, and pushes them back into the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic and reason.
I agree that the prefrontal cortex needs to come back online. We are in total agreement there. But you cannot force a traumatized brain into logic without first establishing safety in the body. If the amygdala thinks there is a tiger in the room, it doesn't matter how well you can profile the tiger, you're still in fight or flight. Healing from covert abuse requires specific, evidence-based somatic recovery exercises to rebuild the basic sense of reality from the ground up.
All right, walk the listener through one of those exercises. How do you establish that safety when the threat is literally living in your house?
We use something called the orienting response. When a victim feels that sudden wave of panic or confusion after a micro-insult, that dog whistle moment, we teach them to pause and slowly scan their physical environment. They name 3 things they can see, 2 things they can hear, 1 thing they can feel.
It sounds almost too simple for the scale of the abuse we're discussing.
I know it seems overly simple, but you have to understand what it's doing biologically. It is retraining the vagus nerve that it is safe to perceive reality in the present moment. It physically untethers them from the emotional flashback of the abuse. It breaks the dorsal vagal freeze state.
But while they are orienting to the room, looking at the couch and listening to the hum of the refrigerator, they still have to deal with the person in the room who is actively lying to them.
Right, which brings me to the second crucial tool in the literature, the perception documentation practice, pioneered by researchers like Shahida Arabi. This is the healthy version of that frantic 47-page document we talked about earlier.
Okay. How is it different?
We instruct victims to write down their gut feelings and perceptions immediately after an interaction, not just the objective facts, but their somatic perceptions.
Give me an example of what they're documenting.
They might write, I perceived that conversation about the holidays as dismissive. That interaction felt dangerous to me, even though they were smiling. My stomach hurt when they offered to help. They do this before the narcissist has a chance to override them with a gaslighting narrative like, I was just trying to be helpful. Why are you so ungrateful?
So they are building a contemporaneous evidentiary record of their own instincts.
Exactly. Over time, reviewing this documentation provides the empirical evidence the victim's brain needs to realize their internal compass is actually perfectly calibrated. It was never broken. It was being jammed by a malicious signal.
That makes sense.
It restores self-trust from the body upward. It overcomes betrayal blindness by safely allowing the victim to validate their own lived experience without ever needing the abuser's permission or validation.
Well, it sounds like we are approaching the exact same goal, but from 2 sides of a heavily fortified wall. To synthesize the profiling perspective from the material, covert narcissism is a deeply organized, predatory structure. It relies on a compartmentalized double life, charm in public, psychological destruction in private.
Right.
These individuals are not just misunderstood or emotionally clumsy. They use pity, weaponized incompetence, and dog whistle gaslighting to deliberately destabilize their targets. Identifying these calculated tactics and intellectually neutralizing their power is the vital first step to breaking the chains of this abuse.
And to synthesize the trauma perspective, while understanding the abuser's playbook is a piece of the puzzle, the true focus must always remain on the victim's internal reality.
Yeah.
The real damage of covert narcissism isn't just a bad relationship. It is a profound epistemic collapse. It is a systematic dismantling of the victim's ability to trust their own mind and body. Healing demands profound self-compassion, trauma-informed care, and somatic retraining to overcome the nervous system dysregulation caused by years of invisible abuse.
We certainly emphasize different battlegrounds today. I mean, I look at the abuser's calculated, locked room mind, and you look at the victim's traumatized, fawning nervous system. But looking at the literature, it is clear that both perspectives are absolutely crucial for fully decoding this dark psychological trap. You have to know the layout of the prison, and you have to heal the prisoner.
You do. The abuser relies entirely on the invisibility of their actions. By bringing both the deliberate tactics and the somatic toll into the light, we strip them of their most powerful weapon, which is secrecy.
Think back to the image we started with today. A predator who doesn't bare their teeth, but instead cries, sighs, and tells you how much they're hurting right before they consume your sanity. The teeth may be carefully hidden behind a mask of vulnerability, but the bite is just as fatal. Keep your eyes open and trust your gut.